Florida does the unthinkable and takes out Ole Miss, just like we called it, just like we drew it up last week. Saw this coming. Uh, we said it was classic trap game, and it was.
Yeah, I think everything we talked about last week, we saw play out on Saturday in Gainesville. Ole Miss coming in off the big win versus Georgia, kind of feeling high and mighty. Florida team coming in for a little bit of confidence off the win versus LSU. Flagway getting comfortable in there. And that's what we saw play out. Florida didn't necessarily play great. Lagway was efficient. He completed 10 of 17 passes for about 200 yards. And Ole Miss was able to move the ball, but it was bad decision after bad decision that cost them in this game.
Yeah, and Jackson Dart did his best Carson Beck impersonation, throwing picks left and right. So a pretty bad day for him. And
It's weird
just
though. I went back and watched the highlights, and Jackson Dart looked really good early in the game. Like he looked very, very sharp. He was throwing the ball well, but it was dumb decisions by Lane Kiffin. They had multiple times where they got down the field and they went for it on fourth down and failed to get it. Twice they tried to run JJ Pegues near the goal line and got stopped on fourth down. And then, towards the end of the game, that's when it all unraveled for Jackson Dart. He threw He threw two picks within the last minutes of the game or whatever it was that just really cost them. It was kind of a crazy sequence because, like I said, they were moving the ball. In Florida, while they played well in this game, they weren't playing great. They weren't beating them down by no means, but it was a close game there until the fourth quarter. It was tied up, I think, and Florida took the lead, and then Ole Miss had a couple of shots, but they just couldn't get it done.
yeah, it's a wild thing. I mean, the SEC this year is just weird. It's absolutely weird because Ole Miss goes out, curb stomps Georgia, just beat the ever living crap out of them. Georgia beat Florida pretty handily, even though Lagway got hurt, and everybody's going to keep bringing that up. Still would have beat them, but and then Florida taking care of business, taking out Ole Miss, and all the other things that happened the rest of this weekend. But
Yeah,
that was the first domino to fall,
yeah.
and
I
what a
think.
domino
Well,
it was.
yeah. I think one of the things we mentioned last week was that this Ole Miss team, it is a team built on transfer players, and transfer players can come in at any given day when you have that much talent and come in and beat an amazing team. They came in and beat a solid Georgia team and beat them handily, but then they do the same thing that they did when they played Kentucky and they don't show up. And that's the problem that you have when you have these teams built on transfers. You don't have the cohesion that you have when you have a team that is built on homegrown players. So
Right.
yeah, that team that was built, that Lane Kiffin said was built to beat Georgia, beat Georgia. But that's the same team that lost to Kentucky, and it's the same team that lost to Florida.
Yeah, so there was a common theme this weekend to those three big defeats. Ole Miss on the road at Florida, Alabama on the road at Oklahoma, Texas A&M on the road at Auburn. And what does everybody always give Kirby crap about when he has a close game on the road?
They gave him crap because earlier this year in a press conference, Kirby Smart said it is really hard to play on the road in the SEC. That's what he said. And people
And
gave him crap about it.
yeah, and if this week doesn't prove it, then you're just a hater, and I feel bad for you.
Right. Kirby, people said that and they're like, oh, Kirby's making excuses for his team not playing well. No, Kirby Smart's giving you a dose of reality. And if it would have been Nick Saban saying the same thing, they would have said, oh, yeah, Nick Saban's right. But because it was Kirby and it's not Nick Saban, the media was very quick to judge. Kirby's just politicking for his team. He's trying to make excuses. We know Kirby. Kirby doesn't BS. He tells you like it is most of the time.
He
And
does.
in that case, you're right. proven so much this weekend. Obviously we've been talking about Ole Miss losing to Florida. Second game, you talked about Alabama goes Norman, a 5-5 Oklahoma team that has struggled on offense all year, that had a game plan to not really throw the ball at all, and Alabama got their butts whooped by Oklahoma.
Boomer freaking Sooner, man. This game was crazy. I wasn't even planning on even turning this game on at all because I thought, man, Oklahoma stinks this year, and Bama's Bama. They're gonna go do what they do, but they didn't do what they do. They did what everybody else usually does against them, and it was a horrible day for Milroe. I know they had some injuries on defense too, and just overall, just a really, really bad day. Because like you said, Oklahoma, they didn't really throw the ball at all. They just ran it up the middle.
With the quarterback, with Jackson Arnold. I mean...
Yeah, it was funny. Like I saw something, they said, oh, you're going to run it up the middle. But that's what we do at Alabama.
Right. I mean, they really took a play out of the Alabama playbook and just ran it with the quarterback. And this Alabama team, it's so weird to watch this Alabama team and how different it is from even the Alabama team of last year, Nick Saban's last year versus this year's team, and how reliant they became on Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams. Like, watching this game, the only offensive game plan they had was Jalen Milroe trying to run and throwing it deep to Ryan Williams.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the only game plan they had. And that was the same game plan that they had when they played Tennessee. And what happened when they played Tennessee? They lost that game too.
Yeah. And, hindsight's 2020. Now that I think about it, Oklahoma has a really good defense.
They do, because Brent Venables is a really, really good defensive coach. He was the reason that those Clemson teams were that good on defense.
Absolutely.
He has helped change the identity of Oklahoma from this crazy offensive thing that it was under Lincoln Riley to a strong defensive team with still trying to find its legs offensively.
Yeah. So the fact that they have this really good defense, and you think about the offense that they run and what they did in the game this weekend. It was Jackson Arnold up the middle, Jackson Arnold up the middle, Jackson Arnold up the middle. Well, if you think about it, if that's what the Oklahoma defense has been facing all year, then they actually matched up pretty damn well with Alabama.
Right. They've seen a lot in practice.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, we don't really have to, it's not that far of a stretch for them.
Yeah. Now the score was 24-3. Obviously, this game was a story about the Oklahoma defense and Milroe's bad play. But I mean, the two interceptions that led to two of Oklahoma's touchdowns,
they were horrible.
They were so horrible. Milroe made horrible throws. And remembering how good he played when they played Georgia, I was just at a loss. Like, that second pick he threw, and he had a chance to tackle the guy and he tried to trip him. Like, what planet is that? Like, Nick Saban would have had an aneurysm if that was his player, trying to trip a guy when you could have just shoved him out of bounds.
Yeah,
like, I know you're frustrated because you threw a pick, but
there's also this guy on Georgia. I don't know if you know about him. His name's Brett Thorson. He's really good at tackling.
Yep.
Milroe could take some lessons from him.
Right. But this game as a whole, obviously, there was some controversy. There was the play that they ended up calling illegal touching on a fourth down, where Ryan Williams made this ridiculous catch in the end zone, and it was a ridiculous catch, and it should have been a touchdown. Yes, the call was wrong. And Alabama fans are like, oh, see, you know what? You're finally getting what everyone else has gotten for the last 15 years.
Exactly.
Calls that are controversial that go against you. For so many years, people have been so afraid of Alabama and Nick Saban and their pull because the SEC office is in Birmingham and it's close to Alabama, and you don't piss off the people that live near you. You just don't. Whether people want to believe it or not, it's a truth. So you finally get some plays called against you, and you're up in arms in a game where you were getting dominated. It doesn't matter if that would have been a touchdown or not. Oklahoma still wins the game. So welcome to the new order of the SEC, where everybody gets bad calls, where everybody gets bad calls because our officials suck. And you're not going to get away with the ones you used to get away with. You're going to get the crap that everybody else has gotten for years.
Why does the SEC have the worst officials?
Because they have maintained this idea that officials are not full-time employees, that they don't pay, that they're part-time employees, and I've never understood it. You have the richest, most prestigious conference in college football, and you won't make your referees full-time employees.
Do other conferences do it?
I don't know, but in the NFL they are.
Right. I know that.
And here's the other kicker.
Like give me an ACC crew any day of the week.
Right.
I'll take that. Yeah, just terrible officiating across the board in the SEC. It's not going away anytime soon. It is what it is, and you just got to live with it. And A&M has to live with this giant L that they took down at Jordan-Hare Stadium on the road at Auburn. Another game that I just had no intention of watching at all. Because
another game
terrible this week.
And another game that was almost ruined by horrible officiating.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so, well, I'll get to it in a minute because it's in the overtime period. So, Auburn started out the game real strong. They jumped out to a 21-0 lead. Peyton Thorne was on, Jarquez Hunter was on, their receivers were dominating, and they jumped out to a 21-0 lead at home. Texas A&M, fought back. They were able to tie it up, before the end of the game, and then we got to overtime. And after the teams exchanged touchdowns in the first overtime, in the second overtime, Auburn had the ball. They threw a pass that would have been a first down at the 2, and they got called for offensive pass interference. And let me say, Hugh Freeze was angry, and he had every right to be. They had a guy crossing across the field, and he kind of moved out of the way of the referee, but he was just running his route. He didn't bump the guy, and they called a pass interference on him, and it ended up setting them back. So they ended up making a field goal. Now, there was kind of a makeup call once A&M had the ball. I think they called a holding penalty. So A&M ended up kicking a field goal as well. But another horrible call that almost turned the game because Auburn, like I said, they went from would have had a first down at the 2-yard line going in. Instead, it was a 15-yard penalty. So it backed them up to like 40. And their field goal kicker had not been doing very well. I think they'd replaced their field goal kicker. Actually, it was a new kid that they only had him for a couple weeks, and he was not kicking great. So he came in and they ended up getting some yards, and he ended up making a field goal, and then they continued on to the 2-point conversion portion of the overtime, which Auburn ultimately won. They got a 2, and then A&M went for kind of a reverse play where they handed it back to the quarterback, and the quarterback hit a wide open guy, and he dropped it. And so Auburn got the win. Strange things happen at Jordan-Hare, man. That's what Nick Saban said it on game day. He's like, weird things happen in that stadium, and they absolutely do.
Playing on the road in the SEC is not easy.
No, it's not. It's a really, really hard thing to do.
Maybe people will start actually believing Kirby. I doubt it. But
yeah.
So we have these 3 crazy losses. And as it turns out, it was exactly the teams that needed to lose for Georgia to get into the SEC championship. So craziness. 2 weeks ago, we're first out of the playoff, and everybody's freaking out. Now we're in the SEC championship game. You can't write this any better.
Right. And so Georgia is going to Atlanta for the SEC championship game for the 7th time in 8 years. Now, for those of us who have been Georgia fans for a long time, to wrap your brain around that 7 times in 8 years is quite an accomplishment.
Is that bad? High score? Is that bad?
It's just weird because making the SEC championship used to be such a big deal. And it still should feel like a big deal, but because they've spent this whole season so worried about the college football playoff and all this chatter, Lane Kiffin saying, oh, some coaches don't even want to play in the SEC championship. Well, guess what, Lane? You're not. You messed around and you found out. But for Georgia, at the end of the day, people were talking about, oh, we don't want to go to the SEC championship. Forget that. You absolutely want to go to the SEC championship. You want to get that bye. You want to be a top seed. There's nothing better than that. Yeah, it would be great to not play in the SEC championship and you have your bye game during the championship week and you get to host a playoff game. But you know what Georgia's looking at now? They're going to play the winner of Texas A&M in Atlanta. So they're either going to play a team that comes in with 3 losses, a couple of bad losses, or they're going to play a Texas team that they already beat the crap out of. And you're going to play for a shot that even though you have 2 losses on your resume, you're going to potentially playing for a shot to be the number 2 seed in the playoff and get a bye. And let me tell you that if you're looking ahead to what these playoffs are going to hold, the number 2 seed is the best spot to be. The number 2 or 3. The number 1 seed is going to have a tougher draw in the playoffs because of how it's laid out than the 2 or the 3. The 2 and the 3 would ultimately, if they win their games, would play, for a shot in the championship game. That 1 seed that will most likely be the winner of the Oregon-Ohio State game would most likely get to the championship game. They're going to have to play the 5 seed, who most likely will be the loser of that Oregon-Ohio State game. So those 2 teams that have already played twice are potentially going to have to play a third time. If you are the 2 or the 3 seed and the 3 seed holds serve and the 3 seed is Miami or it's the Big 12 champion, you're playing for a shot in the national championship game by beating Miami or a Big 12 champion or one of these lesser schools from the SEC versus having to play Ohio State or Oregon.
Yeah. I think it's good that we're in the SEC championship. I do see this as kind of like this is our first round playoff game,
right?
Because I'm not sold on Georgia getting into the playoff if we lose this game. This is the exact scenario that Lane Kiffin was talking about. You're gonna risk getting another loss and getting knocked out of the playoff instead of at least getting into the first round.
So, provided that it's Texas, that if it's Texas in the SEC championship game against Georgia, if Georgia loses to Texas, they're 100% in the playoffs still because you beat that Texas team and you beat them on the road. If it's Texas A&M, they're a little bit weaker, so that makes you look a little bit weaker. But you got to remember that with these teams that lost, A&M's already got 3 losses. Alabama's got 3 losses, 2 of them bad losses. Georgia's only losses are to highly ranked teams. Ole Miss has got bad losses. They've got a loss to a 5-5 Florida team now. They've got a loss to a 3-8 Kentucky team. Ole Miss has got way worse losses than Georgia. Alabama's got way worse losses than Georgia. I don't think that they will punish a team in a conference championship game with a schedule as strong as Georgia. Anybody else, probably anybody else in the country.
I gotta stop you there. I do think they would punish Georgia because they have not shown in any of their rankings this year that they care about strength of schedule.
But who are they going to bump Georgia for? Who are they going to bump Georgia for?
I don't know. Penn State.
Penn State's already in it. They already count Penn State in. They're going to end up with 1 loss. They're already in. You're not bumping Penn State. Penn State's already in. Already count Indiana in. Look, if you think about it as what we saw this last weekend, the Big Ten is probably getting 4 teams in the playoffs.
I'll tell you, it would be South Carolina.
And South Carolina is the only questionable one. That is the only person that you could consider putting in over Georgia. That's the only one. Because Tennessee's in now. unless they lose to Vanderbilt. Tennessee's in. Now Georgia has a win over Tennessee. So Tennessee's in at this point. To me, Ole Miss's losses are too bad. The win over Georgia is not going to outweigh them still having 3 losses in the regular season, because at the end of the day, when they compare Georgia and Alabama and Ole Miss, Georgia lost twice in the regular season, and those teams lost 3 times. And if they set a precedent and they put one of those teams in over Georgia, they're looking really bad. All the things that they said about this playoff is wrong if they do that, and I don't think they will. So
We'll see.
South Carolina could be the only case because they're playing well. But you got to remember, South Carolina's got to play Clemson this week, so we'll see what happens.
It's true. Is that at home or on the road?
It's at Clemson, I think.
Okay, we'll see if it's as hard to win on the road in the ACC.
Right.
All right. So Georgia played UMass this week, so it was one of our preseason games at the end of the season, which is always fun. And Georgia getting a little, picked on a little bit here because they let UMass hang around for a while. The defense came out just lifeless, sleepwalking. Like literally the old saying, you just roll your helmet out there and you're going to win the game. That's exactly how they looked on defense.
Yeah.
And it was a little worrisome. I'm not going to lie.
It was the only reason it wasn't worrisome is because the offense was absolutely lights out. Like, this might have been the best offense looked all season, and I know it's UMass, but outside of 3 straight weird passes on a drive where we were moving the ball, like Carson Beck threw 3 straight incompletions, and I don't know why all of a sudden he lost it for 3 plays in a row. But other than that, he was super crisp. We were running the ball. Georgia racked up over 300 yards passing and over 200 yards rushing, I think, for the first time all season. Nathan Frazier ended up with 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. Offense was efficient. I think Georgia punted once. No turnovers. They looked really good. The defense looked bad, but Kirby even had said that the defense, they just weren't ready to play today. It was one of those days. And when Georgia started swapping out some of their defenders, when they kind of got the lead, they put in the backups, and the backups looked great. They got in there and they kind of shut UMass down finally. So there were a couple of long plays, broken plays that kind of also skewed the numbers there. UMass hit that one crazy 75-yard pass play where I don't know what the hell our guys were doing. I think Daniel Harris thought Dan Jackson coming over the top was going to make the tackle. So Daniel Harris went for the ball, but Dan Jackson, who was covering safety, also went for the ball, and then neither went for the tackle. They just weren't locked in.
Yeah.
But like I said, at the end of the day, the game didn't mean much.
Yeah. I mean, the game was never in doubt.
Right.
Georgia was going to win.
Right.
Just by sheer talent alone.
Right.
It was a great day for the offense. I think it was a good confidence builder. It's kind of like, you practice something to get that muscle memory, you get some good reps in, and it looked like they were starting to hit that because, we got our first 100-yard rusher of the year. Good Lord, this late in the season. Just shows how bad our offensive line has been at run blocking. Yep. But they were humming right along. Carson, very efficient, showing a lot of good potential. If 2 weeks in a row, he's had 2 really clean games, 2 weeks in a row where he's lit it up. And if the offense plays the way that they've played against Tennessee and UMass the rest of the season, look out. Yep. Georgia would be the most dangerous team in the playoff.
Right. All right, so we'll move on from Georgia. We'll move on to Ohio State taking on Indiana. Indiana, one of the the stories of the season in college football, undefeated, playing great, but at the end of the day, one of the weakest schedules in the entire country. Coming into this game, where obviously they were playing Ohio State, number 2 in the country, and obviously one of the top teams in the Big Ten. There are 18 teams in the Big Ten this year. Before this game, they'd played the other bottom 7 teams in the Big Ten. Like, how does that even happen? Like, nobody
Yeah.
from the top half at all.
Well, one thing that was kind of weird that I saw is last week they have the 100 and something easy schedule. They play Ohio State. Now they got the 58th toughest schedule. How does that even work?
Because you add in a team that's now 10-1. It's 10 wins, and it skews the schedule.
Yeah. Or however they're calculating this stuff, I don't know.
Some of the other teams that they played also won last week, so you're adding in 10-1 in your schedule.
Yeah.
But I think Michigan won to get bowl eligible. Some of the other teams that they played won this week, so overall that increased it. That's why. But still, that said, even at 58, you can't overlook the fact that most of their schedule was the bottom half of the Big Ten. They finally played a team with a backbone, and like a lot of people expected, they were able to hang with Ohio State there, early in the game. But in the second half, started making the little mental mistakes and errors that happen to a team when they're overwhelmed by, the talent on the other side of the ball. Ohio State pulled away.
Yeah, that's the difference between the elite teams and the good teams, right? It's that depth. And Ohio State, we know that roster's stacked from top to bottom. And Indiana's a good team. Don't get me wrong, I am not hating on Indiana at all. But they just aren't in that same class where consistently they could keep up with an Ohio State, because they're gonna run down and Ohio State's gonna lean on them, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, they made the mistakes that you can't make as a team like Indiana playing a team like Ohio State. They fumbled the snap on the punt, and then they gave up a punt return touchdown. Like, you have to be solid in the special teams when you are playing a team that is better than you. You can't. Those are areas that you should be able to at least stay equal with them if you just do your job.
Yeah.
And in both those cases, they didn't. Caleb Downs is one of the best players in America. There's a reason that we wanted him at Georgia, and why Ohio State swooped in, even though he'd already got an apartment in Athens and was about to enroll, and paid him a ton of money to come up there. He's one of the best players in the country, and he showed it. That punt return was fantastic.
Yeah. And credit to Ohio State. They came out, took care of business, and they look like the number 2 team in the country. I mean, right. I don't think anybody can dispute that Ohio State is clearly deserving of that number 2 spot.
Right. Oh, they clearly are. This game, it was 38-15, 23-point game. Really probably wasn't that close, because Ohio State kind of made some mental mistakes there early in the game that kept them from scoring. I think they went forward on a 4th down once, and it really wasn't that close. Some people are pointing to Ohio State being sore losers because they scored a touchdown in the last minute of the game to make it 38-15 when it was 31-15. But in this day and age of playoff seedings and everything else,
you got to
go in and score and make it look better. You have to, when you're playing another team in the top 10. It looks better to beat another top 10 team 38-15 than it does 31-15. It just does.
Absolutely.
Optics are all about the game, and you need everything you can get. So anybody mad? I'm not a Ryan Day fan, but score the touchdown.
Yeah. Perception is reality, especially when there's a selection committee who is ranking and seeding teams in a way that no one can figure out
how they're doing it. Yep.
Yeah. Ohio State, they are going to be a really dangerous team in the playoff. We'll see how far they've come when they play in the Big Ten championship against Oregon for that rematch. It'll be interesting. Neutral site, see who comes out on top there. I
I
gotta
mean,
think that
right now,
Ohio State's favored.
oh, they'll be favored. And I honestly think that right now, looking at the landscape of college football right now, I'm a Georgia fan through and through, but I can't say that I think we're one of the top three teams in the country right now. I think we're top five, but I think right now you've got Oregon and Ohio State have separated themselves from everybody else.
Absolutely.
Just like in years past, that's the problem, going to this 12-team playoff is even in the years when we've had a 4-team playoff, up until last year, you've always had definite separation of the teams, right? That even within those top four, there's been one or two teams that have just been way better, So even at 4 teams, you had disparity. And so everybody's like, oh, 12 teams, it's going to be, more chances. Do I think that there's anybody down the card right now that can really hang with Oregon, Ohio State, maybe Georgia, maybe Texas? Outside of
Maybe.
that, maybe Notre Dame, but they have lost to Northern Illinois. So is there anybody down that card? I don't know. I don't know if I can say that right now.
I mean, SMU is going to take it all. They're going to win it.
You and your boy Craig James.
Exactly. The fighting Craig Jameses. All right. So switching gears, let's head down to Big 12 country. Kansas is another team that you wouldn't want to see in the playoff right now.
Kansas is the best 5-6 team in the country. I can honestly say they are the best 5-6 team in the country. They have 3 straight wins over, at the time, highly ranked teams because they beat Iowa State, they beat BYU, and now they've beaten Colorado.
And this is a big one for Colorado to lose. I mean,
it basically ends Colorado's hopes in the Big 12. There are way down the line scenarios with when it's 5 or 6 teams tied that they could get back into that Big 12 title game, but they had the inside shot. They were playing well, and all they had to do was win out, and they were going to be in that game. With the glitz and the glamour and that team and everything, they were going to get the spotlight. They screwed around, and Kansas hurt them. They went in there prepping and confident, and Kansas put it on them.
They did. And I'll say this. I am a Coach Prime fan, but I think he's a little overrated this year. And the reason being is he's got 2 players on his team that may go number 1 and 2 in the draft this year.
Yep.
If you had the number 1 and 2 player in the draft on your team, on any other team that was worth a damn, would you be losing to Kansas?
Nope. You wouldn't be letting Devin Neal run for 207 and 4 touchdowns. I'll tell you that much.
I mean, if Travis Hunter and Shadur Sanders were on Ohio State or Georgia or Texas, I mean, no way they wouldn't lose to Kansas.
You also wouldn't have guys on your team doing the Heisman pose when they scored a touchdown, but they're still down multiple scores.
Yeah, that's a bad look.
I like Travis Hunter. I think he's a fantastic player, but you're making good plays, son, but you're losing the game. Keep your focus where the focus needs to be. I even saw after the game, Deion talking to his players, and I'm normally not a big Deion fan as a coach. I don't really like him. I don't like his approach, but he was pretty good. It was pretty good down home. Was like, look, you guys went out there and you got humbled. You got beat. We went in there confident, and this team outplayed us, and that's what happens. And it was a very, very, for Deion, a very humble approach that I haven't seen much out of him, because usually it's the flash and kind of making excuses, and he wasn't. He was pretty straightforward with his team. So it cost him. They absolutely had a chance. If this is the ascendancy of Colorado into being a football power that the media would love to have happen, it hit a serious road bump in the form of the Kansas Jayhawks.
It did, but they still got Juju, right?
Yep, Juju Lewis committed there. We'll see how long that holds if Deion ultimately goes to the NFL. He's already
Sure.
getting, Dion is getting some rumors for some of these opening jobs that may be coming in the NFL. And, if he takes one of those jobs and commits to drafting his son and around him, I could see it happening because it's the Flash. It's the flashy name.
Yeah, well, depending on where he goes, I mean, getting up there to draft his son might be a little too difficult.
It may be. It may be.
Unless Shooter is like, I am not. He's going to pull a John Elway or Eli Manning.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Or it could be a situation with like LeBron James's kid this year. You're like, no, like if you draft my son, I'm going to come play with you. I'm going to come play for you. It might
I'll
be one
come
of
coach
those.
for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that could absolutely be the situation. If I, as part of his deal, I'm coming to coach for you, you're going to trade up, and so I can take my son.
Yep. Uh, Deion Sanders.
But outside now that Colorado's kind of out, it opened the books for Arizona State, who now looks like, in my opinion, is probably the favorite to get the Big 12 playoff bid. They knocked off BYU. They jumped out to a lead, and BYU came back on them. But Arizona State was able to hold on and win that game. They're set to be in the Big 12 title game with a win next week. They play in state. They play Arizona. And then just based on how things are shaping out in the Big 12, there are lots of potential scenarios. But if everybody holds set, Arizona State beats Arizona. Iowa State plays Kansas State next week. If Iowa State wins, then they'll get in. So it'll be Arizona State, Iowa State in the Big 12 title game. The other scenario is that BYU could get in with a win over Houston and an Iowa State loss to Kansas State. If
Yeah,
some
yeah.
more stuff happens down the road, even further, then there's a small chance Colorado gets in. But
What a great
most
story,
likely,
though.
yeah.
I mean, what a great story. Arizona State was predicted to be last in the Big 12 this year.
What I think they were like 3-9 last year.
Yeah, and now they're favorites to win it. And I think people were giving the coach some crap over the weekend because he was just very straight up about how it all works now, and I loved it,
Yeah.
because he said, yeah, all that happened, but you got to rush the field twice. That's awesome. I'm gonna be watching Arizona State here in the next couple of weeks because they just look like a fun team.
Yeah, and I mean, if Arizona State wins and they get into the playoff, they'll be one of those teams as a bye. They're going to be coming in. They're going to be a 3 or a 4 seed, just depending on what happens with the ACC, who comes out of that. So it'd be interesting, though. They'll get a bye in that first round and then be a second round playoff team for somebody.